Have you ever stopped to consider that what you deem most certain in your life might be founded on a misunderstanding? A small detail, altered by time and tradition, capable of completely transforming your understanding of something you thought you knew so well. The room was silent when Mel Gibson, with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories, finally spoke. The cameras captured his every movement, but no one was prepared for the words that would leave his lips. Perhaps you have heard rumors, fragments of this story, but never the complete truth. Until now. For years, he began, his voice lower than usual, I have studied the original texts, delved into the ancient languages, and discovered something that shook me deeply. The silence that followed seemed to contain the collective sigh of everyone present. You, like millions around the world, grew up pronouncing a name, invoking it in prayers, seeking comfort in it. Jesus Christ, a name that has traversed centuries, cultures, and continents, a name that became synonymous with faith, hope, and redemption for countless souls. But what if that name, exactly as you know it, never existed in the way we pronounce it? The name Jesus, as we know it today, was never spoken by his disciples, by his mother, or by anyone who lived in his time. Gibson revealed, with a look that mixed reverence and urgency, the name that echoed in the hills of Galilee was different. Do you feel that strange sensation, that discomfort when something you have always regarded as absolute truth begins to transform before your eyes? It is as if the ground beneath your feet starts to tremble gently, not enough to knock you down, but enough to make you question your stability. The filmmaker continued, each word carefully chosen. During the production of The Passion of the Christ, I was confronted with this reality. We simply could not ignore it. It was a matter of authenticity and, above all, truth. The studio lights appeared even more intense at that moment. The reporters, usually eager to interject with their questions, remained in respectful silence. Something greater than a mere interview was unfolding. It was the kind of moment when you can feel the weight of history being rewritten. And you, are you ready to hear a truth that might forever change your connection with the most revered figure in Western history? The path to a transformative revelation is rarely easy or straightforward. Like water that slowly shapes stone, the truth reveals itself in layers, testing our willingness to abandon the comfort of what we have always known. When I began researching for the film, continued Gibson, now with an almost feverish gleam in his eyes, I consulted experts in Aramaic and ancient Hebrew. I didn't just want to tell the story. I wanted to transport people to that time and place. What he did not know was that this quest for authenticity would lead him to confront something much deeper than the mere matter of translation. Can you imagine the feeling? Devoting years of your life to a project and, in the process, discovering something that shakes the very foundations of what you have always believed. The original manuscripts of the New Testament were written in Koine Greek, Gibson explained, but Jesus and his disciples primarily spoke Aramaic, with some knowing Hebrew and possibly a little Greek. When we translated these texts into Latin and later into modern languages, something crucial was lost. The studio, now completely absorbed, seemed to vibrate with an almost palpable energy. It was as if every person present could feel the weight of that knowledge beginning to unfold. In the original texts, the name used was not Jesus, but Yeshua. Gibson finally revealed, the words sounding both strange and, at the same time, oddly familiar on his lips. Or, in some variations, Yehoshua. Do you feel it? That small spark of recognition when you hear these names? As if, somehow, deep within your consciousness, you had always known this. Gibson continued, think about it for a moment. For 2,000 years, billions of people have pronounced a name that is, in truth, a Greek transliteration, passed into Latin and then into our modern languages. It isn't that it's wrong, but it isn't how he was called by those who walked alongside him. The camera cut to a close-up of his face, capturing the intensity in his eyes. When you say Yeshua, you are echoing the exact sounds that Mary used to call her son, the sounds that the disciples used when referring to their teacher. There is power in that, a direct connection that transcends time. The words lingered in the air like incense in an ancient temple. Do you feel it now? How a name can be much more than a mere collection of sounds. How it can carry the essence, the true nature of someone. And what if every time you said Jesus in your prayers, you were using a name that he himself never heard in life? The word name comes from the Latin nomen, related to the Greek onoma. In ancient cultures, a name was not just a casual designation. It was the very essence of a person, containing their power, purpose, and destiny. Yeshua, Gibson explained, his voice now firmer, literally means salvation, or Yahweh saves. Every time someone pronounced his name, they were declaring his mission on earth. It wasn't just how he was called, it was who he was. Have you noticed how, when we learn the meaning of a name, our perception of that person subtly changes? As if we gain access to a deeper layer of their identity. The studio remained in reverent silence as Gibson revealed something few had considered. When the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary, he did not say, "You will bear a son, and you shall call him Jesus." In Aramaic, he said Yeshua, declaring from the start what his purpose would be, to bring salvation. At this moment, you might be feeling a mix of fascination and discomfort. Why is it that this seemingly basic information for biblical scholars is not more widely known? Why do we continue to use a name that is essentially a translation of a translation? The progression went something like this, Gibson explained, tracing an invisible timeline in the air with his fingers. From the Aramaic Yeshua, it passed into Greek as Isis, then into Latin as Jesus, and finally into the forms we know today. Jesus in English, Jesus in Spanish, and so on. One of the interviewers, breaking the silence at last, asked, "So you are saying that we are all wrong when we call him Jesus?" Gibson smiled, that kind of smile that suggests a deeper understanding. "I'm not saying it's wrong. God certainly understands all languages and all the intentions of the human heart. I am merely inviting people to reflect on the difference between knowing someone through layers of translation and knowing him by the name that resonated in their own ears. Do you sense the difference? Try pronouncing it slowly. Yeshua. Feel how the syllables form in your mouth, how the sound vibrates differently from Jesus." During the filming of The Passion of the Christ, continued Gibson, I insisted that the actors speak in Aramaic and Latin. Many questioned why not make the film in English to make it more accessible. But there was something profoundly authentic and powerful in hearing those ancient words, those true names. The studio lights seemed to dance as he spoke, creating a play of shadows on his face that underscored the gravity of his words. When you change the name, you subtly change the relationship. It's like calling someone by a nickname they've never used. And this raises a question you may have never considered. When we pray to Jesus, are we truly connecting with the essence of the one who was born as Yeshua? Or is there an invisible layer of separation created by centuries of translation and tradition? The revelation of a name is not merely a linguistic or historical matter. It is an invitation to a deeper, more authentic connection with what that name represents. "What happened after the filming surprised me," confessed Gibson, leaning forward slightly as if sharing a secret. "I began using Yeshua in my personal prayers. At first, it sounded strange, almost uncomfortable, like a new garment that had yet to fit the body. Can you imagine that sensation? Decades of calling someone by a name, and then suddenly discovering that it was not his true name. But after some time," he continued, with a glimmer in his eyes that was impossible to miss, "something changed. The intimacy I felt was different. It was as if, by using the name with which he was truly called in life, I was breaking an invisible barrier that I never knew existed." The camera zoomed in on Gibson's eyes, capturing a genuine emotion rarely seen in celebrity interviews. This was not performance, it was testimony. I'm not saying that God hears more or less depending on how we call him. That would be absurd. What I'm suggesting is that perhaps we listen differently, feel differently, when we approach with this awareness. Have you ever had the experience of meeting someone from another culture whose name you initially found difficult to pronounce? And then, when you finally learn to say it correctly, you see a smile of recognition on that person's face? It's as if, in that moment, a new level of connection is established. Gibson took a deep breath before continuing. The ancient Hebrews had such reverence for God's name that they refused to pronounce it in full. They understood the power contained in a name. It wasn't just a label. It was a gateway to the essence of the one who bore it. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras. People were not just listening. They were absorbing and processing an idea that challenged centuries of habit and tradition. When John wrote, "In the beginning was the Word," the Greek term used was logos, which is much richer than our translation as word or verb. It signifies the complete expression, the perfect manifestation. The name Yeshua carries that same depth. It is the sonic expression of the divine mission. At this point, you might be wondering, what would change in my spiritual life if I began using the original name? Would it be merely a linguistic curiosity? Or could it transform my experience of faith? And what if the authenticity of our relationships began with something as fundamental as calling someone by the name that truly belongs to them? Every great revelation comes with resistance. It is human nature to cling to the familiar, even when confronted with a truth that could set us free. When I began speaking about this publicly, Gibson said, his tone now more somber, I received criticism from all sides. Some theologians accused me of excessive historical precision. Religious leaders questioned my obsession with linguistic authenticity. Others suggested I was trying to Judaize Christianity. You know that feeling, don't you? When you discover something deeply significant and, upon sharing it, you encounter misunderstanding or even hostility. What many do not understand, he continued, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that betrayed his frustration, is that I am not trying to divide or create controversy. I am inviting people to a deeper, more authentic connection with the central figure of their faith. The camera captured the moment. His gaze intensified, as if he could see through the lens, directly into you, the one watching. Think about it. During his earthly life, if you wanted to capture someone's attention on the street, you would have to shout Yeshua. He wouldn't have turned if you shouted Jesus. This simple observation carries a surprising depth. The words we use shape our perception of reality. The names we invoke create bridges between our world and what we seek to access. In many mystical traditions, including some streams of early Christianity, it was believed that knowing the true name of something or someone granted access to its essence, not in a magical or superstitious sense, but as a genuine connection. Gibson paused, as if carefully weighing his next words. I'm not suggesting that we abandon the name Jesus. It carries centuries of devotion, art, music, and prayer. It would be like trying to change the course of a mighty river. What I propose is an expanded awareness, a deeper understanding. Have you ever learned a word in another language and realized that it expresses something your mother tongue cannot quite capture? As if suddenly you had access to a new facet of reality. Yeshua and Jesus refer to the same divine person, yet they carry different layers of meaning and historical experience. One connects us directly with the man who walked the hills of Galilee. The other connects us to 2 millennia of Christian tradition. The studio was immersed in an almost meditative atmosphere. It was no longer merely an interview. It was a collective contemplation. What would happen? Gibson asked, his voice now barely above a whisper. If we began to include Yeshua in our prayers, our hymns, our reflections, not replacing it, but enriching our experience. And you, what would happen if, the next time you sought spiritual connection, you allowed that original name to pass your lips? Would your perception subtly change? Might invisible doors open in your understanding? There comes a moment when knowledge ceases to be mere information and transforms into lived wisdom. It is when revelation moves from the mind to the heart, permanently altering the way we exist in the world. The most extraordinary thing, Gibson said, now with a serenity that contrasted with the earlier intensity, was what happened when I began sharing this discovery with ordinary people, not theologians or academics. I saw tears in the eyes of elderly individuals who, after decades of faith, felt as if they were being introduced anew to the one they had always loved. Do you feel the power of that experience? As if, after years of speaking to someone through an interpreter, you could finally speak directly in your own language. One lady told me that when she began using Yeshua in her prayers, she felt a different presence, as if a layer of formality had been stripped away. It's as if I were finally calling him by the name his mother used, she told me. The camera captured the moment Gibson closed his eyes briefly, as if reliving the memory. It's not about historical correction or linguistic precision. It's about intimacy, about honoring the fullness of someone, including their cultural and historical identity. You might be wondering, what does this mean for me here and now? How could this revelation transform my personal journey? I suggest something simple, Gibson offered, spreading his hands in an inviting gesture. The next time you pray, meditate, or simply seek spiritual connection, try using Yeshua alongside Jesus. Not as a replacement, but as an enrichment. Notice how you feel. What changes in your perception? The studio was enveloped in a contemplative quiet. The usual questions about future projects, controversies in the film industry, seemed trivial in the face of the depth of the moment. The power of a name lies not only in its sound, but in the recognition it represents. When we pronounce Yeshua, we acknowledge the entirety of the one who came, his culture, his language, his historical era. We honor his complete humanity even as we revere his divinity. Gibson looked directly into the camera, as if he could see every person who would watch that interview in the years to come. I'm not asking you to change your beliefs. I am simply inviting you to enrich and expand your experience, like someone who, after years of gazing at a magnificent painting, is gently encouraged to view it under a different light, revealing colors and details that had always been there, but that you had never noticed. And isn't this true for so many aspects of our existence? How many times have we thought we knew something or someone completely, only to discover that deeper layers lay waiting to be revealed? The beauty of true faith, Gibson concluded, is that it never fears the truth. On the contrary, it seeks it out constantly, knowing that each new discovery doesn't diminish the mystery, but deepens it. The studio lights began to dim softly, signaling the end of the interview. But for many in the room, and perhaps for you now, it was only the beginning of a journey of rediscovery, because a name is not merely a name when it carries with it 2 millennia of humanity's quest for connection with the divine. And perhaps, by allowing Yeshua to resonate alongside Jesus in our hearts, we can bridge the gap between the present and those distant days in the hills of Galilee, when heaven and earth met in the gaze of a man whose name meant salvation. What will you do with this revelation? Will you let it be merely an intellectual curiosity, or allow it to transform the way you connect with the sacred? The answer, as always, lies in the silence of your own heart, in that sacred space where names are not just spoken but lived. In your quietest moments, try whispering that name, Yeshua. Feel how it vibrates differently, how it carries an echo of ancient times. There is no need to abandon the familiar. It is possible to enrich your spiritual experience by embracing the fullness of the one you seek to know. Because, in the end, perhaps the greatest revelation is not about how we call him, but about how we allow him to call us, with our true name, beyond all the layers we have accumulated over a lifetime.